Here I am, living temporarily in a hotel room because I have had all my plans disrupted by the UK Visas and Immigration Service. It's not only me who has been affected, but my entire family. Angry? Yes. Ashamed to be British? Yes. Concerned my daughter might also be abused by her own government in the same way that I have? Yes. So, in this video, I will describe the evidence of the appalling process that constitutes the UK Visas and Immigration Service from a service user's perspective. Who can be the sponsor? This is a very fundamental question that so obviously, self-evidently requires a definition or at least guidance on exclusions, especially since family is a group of people. So we need to know which of those people can be the sponsor. And yet, in all of the guidance notes and the website that is associated with the application form and on the application form itself, nowhere does it specify who can and cannot be the sponsor. Oh, that's very generous, but for nearly £1,000 visa fee, I think they could perhaps have put all of the information on it that's required for filling out the form correctly. Or is that too much to ask for something known as a service? So I made an email inquiry simply asking the question, can father-in-law be the sponsor? And both the British Consulate in Shanghai and the application centre where you have to hand in all the documents both replied with an automated email that was uninformative. So I went ahead with the application, assuming that where no information is given, a degree of flexibility must be worked into this system. I was wrong. Father-in-law is not considered to be an appropriate sponsor. Now, to be fair, the entry clearance officer did ignore the fact that we had applied using a sponsor who could not be a sponsor and considered me to be the sponsor by default. This is the only instance of reasonableness in the entire application process, and it does nothing to justify the misinformation that led to this error in the first place. Such as, for example, take a look at who can be the sponsor according to the application form. I have since been informed by an extraordinarily reluctant officer at the visa section in Shanghai, more on that encounter later, that the sponsor can only be the partner of the applicant. So, why is it that on the form the words spouse and partner are not options, nor are husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend or fiancé? In fact, there is no word meaning partner on the form, where you have to say what your relationship is to the sponsor. I think that goes beyond misleading. In fact, these people are implicitly given a value less than that of friend, nephew, niece, or even work colleague. Given these choices, father-in-law doesn't seem to be particularly problematic. I mean, father is an option there, and adding the in-law, it simply becomes other relative, which is the exact same status that applies to spouse or partner anyway. This is misleading in the extreme. And it's not exactly difficult to produce these kinds of drop-down lists, which suggests that this is probably deliberate. Either way, incompetence or deliberately misleading, I believe I'm fully justified in claiming that this falls far short of the kind of service that I expect for a fee of nearly £1,000. I now move on to the concealed TB test. This was one of the first indicators that there were serious issues with the information provided on UK Visas and Immigration website and accompanying documents and guidance notes. The screenshot here shows that the website, where it advises on documentary evidence the application needs to provide to support the application, there is in fact no mention of the TB test. There is a link to the guide to supporting documents, generic document suggesting supporting documents that may be required for a whole range of visas. And on the second page of this guide, it does have a link to a web page from which you can navigate to a web page that does indeed state that an applicant from China who is applying to stay in the UK for longer than 6 months needs to have a TB test. Now, apart from the fact that this is not made clear on the list of documents you need to provide on the website for the settlement visa to join family in the UK, it isn't mentioned on any of the specific documentation that corresponds to the requirements of this specific visa. So, one would reasonably assume, as I did, that the TB test mentioned on the generic guidance document applied to some other visa. I mean, couldn't they put a link to this page from the original which documents you need to support your application page? It is interesting, if you look here, who doesn't need to be tested. There are a couple of exclusions, one of them being you're a diplomat. What, diplomats are immune to TB, are they? Might also be worth just briefly having a look at the WHO information on the TB vaccine, because my wife had been vaccinated against TB, so I was thinking, well, couldn't we just show them the scar that shows she's had the TB vaccination? But in fact, it turns out that the TB vaccine is actually not that effective. Anyhow, as a result of all this, we made an appointment with the application centre without any awareness that a TB test was necessary, and were somewhat alarmed when the appointment confirmation came through and a TB test was on the list of required documents. This means that we had to mess around organising the TB test. Since my wife was pregnant, we didn't want to go for what we thought would be an unnecessary X-ray, even though apparently X-rays are actually a very small risk. Still, we went for the sputum test, which raised the overall cost of the visa well over the £1,000 mark, and it delayed the whole process for 10 weeks. My next point concerns other errors that occurred throughout the application process. I'll start this with a disclaimer on behalf of UK Visas and Immigration Service. The website does state that the service is a beta version and it is being tested. Allegedly, it's designed to make the application process simpler and clearer. God only knows what it must have been like before then. Anyway, the fact that this is a beta trial system does not absolve the UK Visas and Immigration Service of responding to issues raised by problems in this trial website, especially given the £1,000 investment an applicant has put into this process. The first issue, beyond the misinformation regarding sponsor and TB test, concerned the change of appointment date that became necessary due to the TB test and the length of time it would take. A window popped up confirming that the date of the test had been changed, and I thought nothing more of it until I logged on again some 10 weeks later. That's how long the TB test took, to check the status of the application, and I was shocked to see that the status had actually changed to complete. Now, I'm sure you can imagine the stress that this causes when you realise that UK Visas and Immigration Service have taken your money, but not allowed you to complete the application that you paid for. Obviously, I complained, and I did receive a response from the webmaster who stated that I could request a refund. I did request a refund, and I did get a refund, but it took a month to come through, so I was out of pocket for that time. And it also meant that we had to actually start a new application, which meant filling in the form all over again. At no time was there any offer of compensation of any kind for all of our time that had been wasted due to this basic computer error.
Now, from this point on, I started documenting the problems. Another error that was on the actual application form, it doesn't really make much difference to the application, to be honest, but it just shows the sort of amateurishness of this whole application process. The English is very confusing. Voluntary elected to depart is surely a positive attribute from the Borders Agency perspective. However, it appears in a list of questions that very obviously refer to events that would be considered in a negative light. In fact, the English and Chinese are different. Having not really understood what the English meant, I asked my wife, and it appears that the English should in fact read, "Have you ever voluntarily elected to depart the UK after having previously broken the UK immigration laws?" Okay, maybe there's a legal definition of voluntary elected to depart that includes the clause "after having previously broken the UK immigration laws." I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but that's the point. An applicant is not expected to be trained in UK law, so even if the statement is legally binding in its present form, as shown on the screenshot there, it would not excuse the lack of clarity.
In fact, one of the required documents for the application evidence is that the applicant has passed a recognised English language test. Now, I work at quite a high level in this industry, so I know that such tests include consideration of the appropriateness and clarity of the language produced. Maybe the people who created this service should be required to take the tests themselves. Now I've experienced the injustice of this system, I believe that this English language component might be the most important piece of documentary evidence in the application process, because it enables the applicant to write a complaint and provides a means of challenging the injustice in the current policy.
The refusal notification also contained errors. In the third paragraph, the officer uses the wrong date, 6th of January 2012 rather than 2015. This demonstrates that the entry clearance officer is as guilty as I am in failing to cross every T and dot every I. The fourth paragraph, the officer declares that your ICBC bank account statement appears to be the screenshot of an online account. This demonstrates that he or she is not sufficiently familiar with the documents in his or her host country, China, in order to be able to carry out his or her duties accurately. Now, there are only small mistakes, but important ones, that are clearly unsatisfactory when I've paid nearly £1,000 for this service, and upwards of £1,000 if you take the TB test and other various fees I had to pay to obtain all the various documents in the first place. In fact, the entry clearance officer concludes that, on the balance of probabilities, my wife and I do not meet the financial requirement. Actually, we do meet the financial requirement, so this has now gone beyond a disservice, and the officer is actually being offensive. The conclusion can be paraphrased as, "I think you are lying and or a fraudster, and even though you've paid nearly £1,000 for this service, I'm not going to give you any benefit of the doubt and contact you or give you a chance to prove yourselves innocent." It does actually say in the guidance notes that the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate that the financial requirement is met, and that decision makers will not generally be expected to make further inquiries or request further information in an effort to establish whether the financial requirement is met. Okay, it is there in the policy. However, Given the amount of misinformation in the guidance notes and the fact that I've paid such a high fee, I would expect that where my financial statements demonstrate that I do hold sufficient funds to meet the requirements, but that the officer is not satisfied with a few technical issues with the documents themselves, there should be no problem with the officer making a brief inquiry to allow us the chance to provide further documentation where deemed necessary.
In fact, without such action, one is left wondering, what exactly is the service that I receive for my £1,000? It also clearly contravenes my basic human right to be considered innocent until proved guilty, by the way. A further error associated with the decision notification is that the appeal forms were not enclosed, although the letter stated that they were. A generic website address was provided, and we used this to search for the required forms. And this is another issue with the whole process. Why, oh why, are we given generic website addresses and then asked to search for the specific form? If the specific form is on the website, and why not provide the link to that specific form? It's so simple. Save everyone a lot of time and might just about justify some kind of service fee. Anyway, having wasted more time searching the website for the required form, my wife and I actually found 2 different forms on the website. How do we know which one to use? Off to the office to go and ask the officer directly. If you go to the visa section? As it happens, due to the failure of the entry clearance officer to enclose the appeal form with the refusal notice, and the fact that I happen to work in a neighbouring office, I decided to go into the visa section to obtain the required form. I went into the waiting area and pressed the intercom buzzer and called out to see if any officers were around. And you can imagine my surprise when the security guard came to tell me to get out. Now, the security guard knows me, and we have a certain rapport. I mean, I work in the neighbouring office, I see him regularly. So he agreed to help me contact the officer so that I could get the form which I am entitled to. The officer on the other end of the intercom first instructed the security guard to throw me out. The guard replied that he could not do that because I worked there and had security clearance, or something to that effect. It was all in Chinese, that exchange. The person on the other end of the intercom then addressed me, and when I said I wanted the appeal form, she told me to just get it from the website. Now, having already looked at the website and found 2 different forms there, that wasn't really an option anymore, so I pushed the point and said I checked the website and there were various versions of the form, and after fiasco with the whole of the original application, I was now demanding that I receive the correct form directly from the officials responsible. She finally agreed to come to the window and gave me a copy of the form. This was probably just as well because the form was actually different to the 2 that I had found previously on the website. I tell you, this service just goes from bad to equally as bad. Whilst I had her attention, I asked her a few direct questions, and she stated that, I quote, "We aren't supposed to answer any questions." So why not exactly? What's wrong with helping your own citizens when they're making a legitimate application to go back to their home country with their family? I don't know. But to her credit, she did confirm that only the partner is eligible to act as sponsor. The point that I'd like to make here and really emphasise is that I could only get this information from the officers responsible for the decision making because I actually worked there. Otherwise, I'd have probably been evicted by security. It's a disgrace.
Shame.
Incidentally, my wife phoned the Chinese equivalent of immigration service to inquire about getting me a Chinese green card. We haven't paid any fees at all, and yet she was able to speak to one of the officials who was very happy to answer her questions and give detailed advice regarding such an application. Perhaps the UK government should consider sending the UK immigration officials to Chinese training programs to study basic customer service. Anyhow, this whole shameful fiasco raises many questions that the British government, and the Home Secretary in particular, frankly, should be obliged to answer, such as, why be deliberately unhelpful? Why deliberately withhold information vital to the success of an application? How does any of this square with such a high visa fee? How exactly does disrupting my family help protect the UK economy and the rights of the UK taxpayer? I have no idea. And what's more, I can't really understand why this is legal. I mean, it's discrimination based on national origin, which is supposedly illegal in the UK, and it contravenes the famous Article 8 right to family life, free from government interference. Not just my family life, but my daughter's family life, her grandparents' family life, right? Her auntie's family life. A whole load of British people's family life is being interfered with here. I don't really understand how this can possibly be legal in the EU.
Shame.
I'm appalled. You're appalled. I'm appalled. I just can't believe it. I'm appalled. Appalled. It's appalling. Appalling. I just don't know how to describe it.
Shame.